Hey everyone, 99% of you watching aren't subscribed. Let's change that. Hit that subscribe button, and at 1,000 subscribers, we'll drop special stories just for you.
The cage hummed with a low, electric pulse, steady, merciless. Asha pressed herself into the farthest corner of the containment field, her back against the seamless curve of translucent alloy. The walls were not solid in the way human structures were solid. They were bands of compressed light, magnetically woven into a cylindrical prison that shimmered with faint geometric patterns. Each pattern pulsed in response to her biology, suppressing the bioelectric currents that normally flowed freely through her body. To the humans, it was a holding cell. To her, it was suffocation. Her silver-blue skin flickered uncontrollably, small arcs of light rippling beneath its surface. The collar fastened around her neck adjusted in response, tightening the dampening frequency. A sharp ache shot through her spine. She clenched her jaw to keep from crying out. Weakness was dangerous. She had been taken during atmospheric descent. Her reconnaissance vessel had entered Earth's upper skies cloaked in refracted starlight, invisible to primitive detection systems. Or so their projections had claimed. But the humans were more advanced than expected. Kinetic projectiles pierced her ship's hull before she could reroute power. Fire consumed the navigation grid. She had crash-landed in a forest of towering carbon structures. Trees, their database called them. She remembered smoke, sirens, armed figures surrounding the wreckage. She had considered vaporizing them. But her mission had been observation, so she allowed herself to be captured. Now she wondered if that had been a catastrophic miscalculation. Boot steps echoed in the corridor outside the chamber. Not rushed, not chaotic, measured. The facility itself was subterranean. She could feel the pressure of earth and stone above. The air was recycled and dry. Human technology vibrated constantly. Cooling systems, security grids, surveillance arrays. She sensed at least 12 weapons aimed at her through the walls. Her people had warned her. Humans fear what they do not understand. Fear becomes cruelty. If detained, expect disassembly. Her breathing quickened. The door at the far end of the chamber slid open with a hydraulic sigh. A human male entered alone. That alone unsettled her. The soldiers who had transported her wore heavy armor and opaque visors. This one wore neither. His uniform was simple, dark fabric, functional, unadorned except for a small insignia stitched over his chest. No visible weapons. No protective shielding. His hair was dark, streaked with gray at the temples. Lines creased his face, not from anger, but from years. He stopped several paces from the containment field, and he simply looked at her, not with hunger, not with hatred, with something else. Assessment. Asha straightened despite the pain. She drew herself to her full height, though the cage forced her to hunch slightly. Her species equivalent of a threat display flared across her skin, bright pulses of indigo light beneath the surface. The human did not flinch. Instead, he slowly raised both hands, palms outward, a universal gesture of non-aggression. "I won't harm you," he said. The collar at her throat translated his language into hers. The mechanical voice echoed inside her skull. Her mind rejected the words immediately. Lie. He stepped closer to the containment field. The surface rippled faintly as his proximity activated scanning protocols. "You can understand me," he observed quietly. She did not answer. He studied the readings on a small tablet in his hand, frowning slightly. "Your vitals are elevated. The suppression frequency is too high." He tapped the screen. The hum of the cage softened. The burning sensation against her skin dulled to a tolerable throb. Asha blinked in confusion. Why reduce the pain? Interrogations required suffering. That was consistent across civilizations. The human looked up from the device and met her eyes directly. His were brown, dark, reflective, not cold. "You must be terrified," he said softly. The translator rendered the word with imperfect accuracy, but she understood. Terrified. The admission scraped against her pride. "I am operational," she replied stiffly. His lips twitched slightly, as if resisting a smile. "That's not what I asked." Silence stretched between them. In the upper corners of the chamber, She noticed small black hemispheres, surveillance units. They pivoted minutely, tracking every movement. This interaction was being observed. He knew that. She knew that, which meant his performance, whatever it was, had an audience. Where are the others? She demanded. In the observation deck, he answered honestly. They prefer distance. And you do not? I prefer conversation. That word again. Not interrogation. Not extraction. Conversation. She took a cautious step forward. The cage flared faintly but did not intensify. You are the one who will dissect me? She asked bluntly. For the first time, emotion flashed across his face. Shock, followed by something darker. No, he said firmly. That won't happen. You cannot guarantee that. A pause. No, he admitted. I can't. There it was. Truth. He stepped closer until he stood just inches from the shimmering barrier. My name is Elias Ward, he said. Names. Humans offer their names freely? Recklessly? She hesitated. Giving her own would create connection. A bridge. Bridges could be exploited. But he had reduced the cage's frequency. He had come alone. He had not shouted. I will not provide strategic information, she said carefully. I'm not asking for that. Then why are you here? His gaze did not waver. Because everyone up there expects me to make you talk. Her pulse spiked. And will you? He studied her for a long moment, as if weighing something larger than the room. No, he said quietly. The word struck harder than a threat. She searched his posture for deception, micro-movements, muscle tension, pheromonal spikes. Her species excelled at detecting falsehood. He was afraid, but not of her. Afraid of what would happen if he failed. Outside the chamber, she sensed movement, more boots, more weapon positioning. The humans were preparing contingencies. The cage hummed steadily between them. Elias Ward glanced briefly toward one of the surveillance cameras, then back at her. They think fear will make you cooperative, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. And you disagree? She asked. Yes. Why? He exhaled slowly. Because fear makes everyone dangerous. The statement lingered in the sterile air. Asha felt something unfamiliar stir within her. A disruption not caused by the dampening field. Confusion. If this was manipulation, it was unlike any she had studied. He stepped back at last. I'll adjust the hydration levels in the air, he said. Your species has higher moisture requirements. Her eyes widened slightly. They had analyzed her biology that quickly, or he had taken the time to understand it. As he turned toward the exit, she called out impulsively, Human! He paused. If you do not intend to torture me, she said carefully, then what do you intend? He looked over his shoulder. To listen. The door slid closed behind him. The cage continued its low, relentless hum. But for the first time since her capture, the light did not feel entirely like a prison. And somewhere deep within the base, alarms of expectation quietly began to shift into something far more dangerous. Hope. The next time Elias Ward entered the containment chamber, he was carrying a chair, not restraints, not instruments. A chair. Asha watched him through the shimmering veil of the cage as he placed it deliberately a few feet from the barrier and sat down. He set a tablet on the floor, beside him, and folded his hands loosely in his lap. The gesture unsettled her more than weapons would have. No one sat during interrogations. They loomed. They circled. They dominated. Ward simply occupied space. Above them, beyond reinforced glass and layers of security clearance, the observation deck filled with officials, military command, intelligence analysts, biohazard specialists. The air up there was tense, sharp with anticipation. Begin psychological pressure, the general ordered quietly. Ward did not move to comply. Instead, he looked at Asha with steady eyes. Did you rest? He asked. The translator rendered the words. She blinked. That is irrelevant. Not to me. Silence stretched between them. The humidity in the chamber had indeed increased. The dryness in her lungs had eased. Even the suppression field seemed calibrated, still limiting her abilities, but no longer punishing her for existing. You altered the environment, she observed. Yes. Why? You were in pain. The simplicity of the answer destabilized her. Pain was a tool, a motivator, a consequence, not something enemies eliminated. She studied him carefully. You are not a soldier. No. Scientist. Yes. That explains the curiosity. He tilted his head slightly. Is that an insult? It is an assessment. A flicker of amusement crossed his face, gone almost instantly. I'll accept that. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees, not threatening, but engaged. What is your name? He asked. The question hung in the air like a blade. Names among her people were not casual identifiers. They carried lineage, harmonic frequency, ancestral memory. To give a name was to acknowledge shared space. Interrogators demanded names. He had not demanded. He had asked. You may designate me Subject 1, she replied. He shook his head gently. That's what they call you upstairs. Her eyes narrowed. And you? I prefer something else. Why? Because you're not an object. The word struck with unexpected force. Not an object. She had reviewed human history. Enslavement, colonization, dehumanization. Humans have reduced their own kind to objects many times. And yet, this one rejected that framework now. Names create vulnerability, she said. They also create trust. Trust is inefficient. Not always. Silence again. The cameras above adjusted, zooming closer. Ward waited. He did not fill the quiet. He did not threaten it. Finally, against her better judgment, she spoke. Asha. He did not react with triumph. He did not repeat it loudly for the observers. He simply nodded once. Asha, he said carefully. He pronounced it correctly, not approximately, correctly. A small, involuntary tremor passed through her. How did you? I listened to phonetic structure when you spoke earlier, he replied. Your language is tonal. Subtle, but tonal. She stared at him. You studied it. Yes. In 3 rotations? I didn't sleep much. Something inside her recalibrated. Up in the observation deck, murmurs rippled. The general leaned forward, pushed her on mission objectives. Ward did not look toward the cameras this time. Asha, he said quietly, why did you people come to Earth? There it was. The expected pivot. Mission. Strategy. Assessment. She straightened slightly. This, at least, she understood. To determine your species' trajectory. In what sense? Expansion. Resource consumption. Weaponization capacity. Ward absorbed this without visible offense. And your conclusion? She hesitated. This was classified intelligence. But her ship was destroyed. Her capture already compromised operational secrecy. Undetermined, she said at last. A flicker of surprise crossed his face. Undetermined? You are contradictory, she explained. Your species creates art and annihilation in equal measure. You heal your sick and manufacture extinction devices. Your data is inconsistent. A faint exhale left him, almost a laugh, but without humor. That's fair. You anticipated hostility, she continued. Your military response time suggests prior contingency planning. We've been scanning the skies for decades, he admitted, just in case. Because you fear invasion. Yes. She tilted her head. Fear appears central to your species. It is... Is that why you will torture me? The question landed heavily. Upstairs, several officials stiffened. Ward's jaw tightened slightly, not at her, but at the implication. No, he said firmly. You cannot override your command structure. No, he agreed again. I can't. Then your assurances lack authority. Maybe. He leaned back in his chair, gaze steady. But authority isn't the same thing as influence. She studied him carefully. You believe you can influence them. I believe cruelty confirms expectations. She processed that. If you harm me, she said slowly, my people will interpret it as validation of threat assessment. And if we don't, she paused. The implications unfolded rapidly in her mind. If you do not, she said carefully, it introduces anomaly. Anomaly, he repeated softly. Yes, data inconsistent with hostile model. And anomalies are important? They require reevaluation. Above them, the general's expression darkened. He's negotiating narrative, someone muttered. Ward stood slowly from his chair. Asha's muscles tensed, expecting escalation. Instead, he walked to the control panel beside the chamber door. The cage's hum shifted. The light softened further. "What are you doing?" she demanded. "Lowering the suppression frequency," he said calmly. Alarms chirped in the observation deck. "Ward, maintain full restraint." The general barked over the intercom. Ward pressed the communication button. "With respect, sir," he said evenly, eyes still on Asha. "If she intended to kill us, she had the opportunity during capture." "That is an assumption. It's an observation." He released the panel. The cage remained active, but no longer burned against her skin. Asha flexed her fingers experimentally. Energy flickered faintly at her fingertips before stabilizing. He had given her partial strength. In a room full of weapons. "You increase risk," she said quietly. "Yes." "Why?" He looked at her, not as a specimen, not as a threat, as someone who might be deciding our future. "Fear makes everyone dangerous," he repeated softly. The weight of that truth settled over her like gravity. For the first time since her capture, she considered something radical. Perhaps the most dangerous species in the room was not the one inside the cage, but the one willing to open it. The order came down an hour later. Escalate. It was a single word transmitted from the observation deck to the chamber below, but it carried the weight of governments, of fear, of every war humanity had ever survived. Asha felt the shift before she heard it. The cage's hum deepened. The geometric light patterns along the barrier brightened from pale white to electric blue. The collar around her throat tightened microscopically, recalibrating to a harsher suppression frequency. Pain returned, sharp, invasive. Her knees buckled. Up above, the general stood rigid behind glass. "We're done with philosophy. Increase neural pressure until she cooperates." Elias Ward did not immediately respond. He stood beside the control panel, hands hovering inches above it. His jaw flexed once. "Sir," he said evenly into the intercom, "we are making progress." "You're making conversation." The general snapped. "She's a scout. There will be more. We need fleet coordinates, propulsion data, command hierarchy." Asha forced herself upright, refusing to show weakness. Her skin flickered erratically under the intensified field. This was the inevitable outcome. Compassion had been a delay, not a deviation. Ward's eyes met hers through the shimmering barrier. For the first time, she saw a conflict there. Not fear. Decision. He turned slightly, angling his body so the cameras could not fully read his expression. "If you push her," he said quietly into the mic, "you confirm every hostile model her species has built about us." "And if we don't?" the general demanded. "If we gamble and lose?" Ward's silence stretched just a fraction too long. "That," the general said coldly, "is above your pay grade." The suppression frequency increased again. Asha gasped despite herself as searing pressure rippled along her nervous system. The collar pulsed in synchrony with the cage, scrambling her bioelectric fields. Her thoughts fractured, static cutting through her concentration. She could break this. Even at reduced strength, she could force an overload. The cage was tuned to suppress, not to withstand maximum discharge. If she channeled everything at once, she could rupture the field. It would kill the soldiers closest to the chamber. It might kill Ward. Her hands trembled as energy began gathering instinctively in her palms. Ward saw it immediately. "Stop," he said, not to her, to the control panel. He slammed his hand against the override key. The chamber lights flickered. Above them, alarms erupted. "Dr. Ward," the general barked. "Stand down." The cage's hum wavered. For one suspended second, the system hesitated between command hierarchies. Then Ward entered his authorization code. The The suppression frequency dropped sharply, not to its previous mild setting. Lower. The collar around Asha's throat loosened with a faint mechanical click. The cage door slid open. Every alarm in the facility detonated at once. Red emergency lights bathed the corridor beyond in violent color. Armed response teams sprinted into position, rifles raised, targeting lasers dancing across Asha's chest. Up in the observation deck, the general stared in disbelief. He's lost his mind. Inside the chamber, the air felt suddenly enormous. Open. Asha stood frozen at the threshold of the cage, power humming freely through her veins for the first time since capture. The relief was intoxicating. Ward stepped away from the control panel and moved deliberately into the line of fire between her and the soldiers. He raised his empty hands. "Stand down," he shouted. No one lowered their weapons. "Dr. Ward, move away from the entity," the security commander yelled. Entity. Asha felt the word like a blade. Ward did not move. He positioned himself directly in front of her, close enough that she could see the faint tremor in his shoulders. He was afraid, but he did not step aside. "This is a mistake." The general's voice thundered over the intercom. "You're compromising planetary security." "No," Ward replied, voice steady despite the chaos. "I'm testing it." Asha stared at the open corridor. She could escape. Her ship's emergency beacon still pulsed weakly beyond the mountains. If she reached open sky, she could signal her fleet. Extraction was possible, or retaliation. Her species would not ignore her capture. They would come armed. She looked down at her hands. Energy art between her fingers, brilliant, lethal. One discharge would disable every weapon in the hall. Another would tear through the reinforced ceiling. She could end the threat. Ward spoke without turning around. "If you're going to run," he said quietly, meant only for her, run. The simplicity of it stunned her. No bargain. No demand. He was giving her the choice. "You will be terminated," she said. "Maybe you will have failed your command. Probably. Your species may suffer consequences." "Yes." The soldier's fingers tightened on triggers. "Then why?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the alarms. He swallowed once. "Because someone has to prove we're more than our worst instincts." The word struck deeper than the suppression field ever had. Up above, the general made a sharp gesture. "Prepare to fire as she advances." Targeting lasers intensified. Asha stepped forward. Every rifle tracked her movement instantly. Ward did not move out of her way. He simply stood there, unarmed, fragile, human. She realized something in that moment with startling clarity. If she attacked, she would not just be defending herself. She would be deciding the narrative her species carried back to the stars. Humans torture captives. Humans shoot first. Humans are dangerous. Or, humans risk themselves for strangers. Her people had come to evaluate threat probability. This was data. Raw. Unfiltered. She took another step. The soldiers flinched. Ward's voice rose above the chaos. "Hold your fire." For a fraction of a second, time seemed to suspend. Asha could feel the tipping point, like gravitational pull before a star collapses. She lifted her hands. Energy flared brilliantly. Several soldiers shouted. And then she let it dissipate. The light faded from her palms. Slowly, deliberately, she stepped out of the cage and came to stand beside Elias Ward instead of behind him. The targeting lasers trembled but did not vanish. She did not attack. She did not run. She simply stood. In the observation deck, silence fell like a drop curtain. The general stared down at the scene, calculation replacing fury. Ward lowered his hands only slightly. Asha looked at him. "You have altered the variables," she said. He let out a shaky breath. That was the idea. For the first time since entering Earth's atmosphere, she felt something other than mission protocol guiding her decision. Choice. And in choosing not to destroy, she had made herself far more powerful than any weapon in the room. Silence did not fall all at once. It spread, from the chamber to the corridor to the observation deck above. Dozens of weapons remained trained on Asha's chest, but no one fired. The red emergency lights continued to pulse, washing the room in warning, yet the moment itself felt unnaturally still, like the pause between lightning and thunder. Asha stood beside Elias Ward, not behind him, not restrained, beside him. Her skin glowed faintly, no longer flaring in defense, but shimmering in steady bioluminescent patterns, calm, controlled. She could feel every electronic system in the facility now. The heat signatures of the rifles, the tremor of anxious heartbeats, the layered security protocols waiting for a single hostile movement. One decision. That was all it would take. Above them, the general's voice returned over the intercom. Quieter now. Dr. Ward. Step away from the extraterrestrial. Ward did not look up. No. A collective intake of breath rippled through the soldiers. You are disobeying a direct command. Yes. Asha studied him carefully. His pulse was elevated. Micro-tremors ran through his muscles. He was not fearless. He was choosing to stand anyway. The general hesitated, just long enough for something to shift. Asha, Ward said quietly, his voice pitched low so only she could hear. This is where you decide what we are. The words settled heavily between them. She turned slowly toward the surveillance cameras embedded high in the walls. Her species' vision could detect microlenses even behind polarized shielding. She looked directly into one. I am transmitting, she said. A few soldiers tensed at the unfamiliar phrasing. She closed her eyes briefly and extended her perception outward, high above the planet's atmosphere. Cloaked beyond human detection grids, her people's observation fleet waited. They had maintained silent orbit since her crash, monitoring, analyzing, calculating response scenarios. Her collar still rested loosely around her throat, but signal dampening was negligible now. She could push beyond it. She focused. A narrow-band quantum pulse surged from her nervous system, too subtle for human instruments to interpret as anything more than background radiation. But her fleet would understand. A simple data packet. Human subject, Elias Ward. Behavioral anomaly detected. Hostility model compromised. Reassessment required. Seconds passed. Then the building trembled. Gasps echoed through the chamber as radar alarms screamed across the facility. Contact! Someone shouted from above. Multiple objects entering lower atmosphere. On a massive screen in the observation deck, streaks of light pierced the sky. Sleek, luminous vessels descending not in attack formation, but in open geometric alignment. Their hulls refracted sunlight into radiant spectrums, signaling non-aggression in Asha's culture. The general stared at the display, color draining from his face. They're here. Panic threatened to ignite. Weapons across the base recalibrated toward the sky. Asha raised her hand, not glowing, not weaponized, just raised. They will not fire, she said calmly. You can't know that. The general snapped through the speakers. I can. The first of the alien ships slowed, hovering high above the mountain range. Its undercarriage opened, not revealing artillery, but emitting a wide-spectrum broadcast pulse. Every screen in the facility flickered, then stabilized. A symbol appeared. 2 interlocking spirals, her species' sign for dialogue. In the chamber, a stunned quiet settled over the soldiers. Ward exhaled slowly, the tension in his posture finally cracking just slightly. They're answering you, he murmured. Yes. Up in orbit, her fleet had received her message. They had analyzed her biometric data, her environmental readings, the absence of torture indicators. They had seen Ward standing between her and armed soldiers. Probability matrices were rewriting themselves in real time. The general's voice came again, no longer sharp with command, but heavy with realization. What did you tell them? Asha kept her gaze on the glowing symbol overhead. The truth. And what is that? She turned slowly back to him. That one of you chose risk over dominance. Ward gave a faint, incredulous shake of his head. I just opened the door. You stood in front of weapons, she corrected. The alien ship's adjusted formation, descending slightly. Close enough now for the naked eye to see their elegant curvature in the sky. No missiles launched. No energy beams charged. Instead, a single smaller craft detached from the largest vessel, and began a slow, deliberate approach toward the base. The soldiers in the corridor looked uncertain now, rifles wavering. Fear had not vanished, but it had been interrupted. The general spoke again, quieter. "If this is a trick—" "It is not," Asha said firmly. "If we intended conquest, it would have begun the moment I was captured." The weight of that statement hung heavily in the air. Ward glanced at her. "You could have destroyed us in here." "Yes, and you didn't." She met his eyes. "Neither did you." The smaller alien craft touched down gently in the valley beyond the facility, its landing producing no shockwave, no scorched earth, only displaced air and light. Across the world, satellites captured the image. Across governments, emergency meetings erupted. Across social networks, speculation ignited. But inside the chamber, it was very simple. A man had refused to torture a prisoner. An alien had refused to retaliate. And history had been around that moment. Asha stepped forward slightly, no longer as a captive, but not yet as an ambassador. Something in between. "My people will request dialogue," she said. "Formal, transparent." The general hesitated. Ward looked up toward the observation deck. "This is the part where we decide who we want to be," he said. The silence that followed was different from the earlier one. Less fragile, more deliberate. Finally, the general gave a single, restrained nod. "Stand down," he ordered. One by one, rifles lowered. The red emergency lights ceased flashing, returning the chamber to steady white illumination. Asha felt something vast shift, not just in this facility, not just in orbit, but across two civilizations that had been bracing for annihilation. All because one human had chosen not to confirm a fear. She looked at Elias Ward. "You understand," she said quietly, "that your name will be recorded in our archives." He gave a faint, almost embarrassed smile. "I was hoping for a quiet life." She studied him, luminous eyes steady. History rarely consults preference. Above them, alien ships shimmered peacefully in the sky. Inside, humans and extraterrestrials stood facing one another without weapons raised. The shock was not that an alien had been captured. The shock was not that a fleet had arrived. The shock was this: compassion had proven more strategically powerful than violence, and everyone had witnessed it.